All right, welcome back to PALS TV. Good to see some familiar faces on here. It's nice to see some people back after the weekend. I know, we are Amanda and I have already been at it for a couple hours now, but it's nice to take a moment and see some smiling faces, see some people that are happy to hang out with us for the day. So I know there will be some more of our friends stopping by here shortly, but I know we have a pretty awesome day planned today. Amanda's going to read from her new book, the Wrinkle or A Wrinkle in Time. We're going to learn about some good healthy snacks, and we'll be finishing the day strong with some trivia and a cooking class in Columbus. So looking forward to all that stuff. But we'll get started with our morning our morning reading and Amanda hanging out with us. So
morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Hi, Nick. I finally get to see you. I'm glad to see you on the camera, and I see Dusty's here and Caitlin, and hello, Alex. Good to see everyone. All right, so we're going to keep reading A Wrinkle in Time today. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Share. All right, do you guys all see the book on there? Thumbs up if you see the book. Good. Okay. Chat. All right, let me get my screen situated. All right, so we are going to start off where we left off. We were kind of in the middle of a chapter. Let me hide my bookmarks bar here. So like I said, we were in the middle of a chapter. We're in chapter 3, Mrs. Witch. So we're going to take off here in a minute. Who can tell me where we left off last week? Anyone know where we left off last week? All right, so last week we met their new friend, Calvin. We met the other witch, and we are going to find out, I believe, what a tesseract is. So we're going to find out that information here in this as we read on. All right, so let's go back a little bit. Okay. No, Meg, but people are more than just the way they look. Charles Wallace's differences isn't physical. It's in essence. Meg sighed heavily, took off her glasses and twirled them, put them back again. Well, I know Charles Wallace is different, and I know he's something more. I guess I'll have to accept it without understanding it. Mrs. Murray smiled at her. Maybe that's really the point I was trying to put across. Yeah, said Meg dubiously. Her mother smiled again. Maybe that's why our visitor last night didn't surprise me. Maybe that's why I'm able to have a willing suspension of belief, because of Charles Wallace. Are you like Charles? Meg asked. Heavens no. I'm blessed with more brains and opportunities than many people, but there's nothing about me that breaks the ordinary mold. Your looks do, Meg said. Mrs. Murray laughed. You just haven't had enough basis for comparison, Meg. I'm very ordinary, really. Calvin O'Keefe, coming in, then said, ha. Charles all settled? Mrs. Murray asked. Yes. What did you read to him? Genesis, by choice. By the way, what kind of experiment were you working on this afternoon, Miss Murray? Oh, something my husband and I were cooking up together. I don't want to be too far behind him when he gets back. Mother, Meg pursued, Charles says I'm not one thing or another, not flesh nor fowl, nor good red herring. Oh, for crying out loud, Calvin said. You're Meg, aren't you? Come on and let's go for a walk. But Meg was still not satisfied. And what do you make of Calvin? She demanded of her mother. Mrs. Murray laughed. I don't want to make anything of Calvin. I like him very much, and I'm delighted he's found his way here. Mother, you were going to tell me about a tesseract. Yes, a troubled look came in Miss Murray's eyes. But not now, Meg, not now. Go on out for that walk with Calvin. I'm going up to kiss Charles, and then I have to see that the twins get to bed. Outdoors, the grass was wet with dew. The moon was halfway up and dimmed the stars for a great arc. Calvin reached out and took Meg's hand with a gesture as simple and as friendly as Charles Wallace's. Were you upsetting your mother? He asked gently. I don't think I was, but she's upset. About what? Father. Calvin led Meg across the lawn. The shadows of the trees were long and twisted, and there was a heavy, sweet autumnal smell to the air. Meg stumbled as the land sloped suddenly downhill, but Calvin's strong hand steadied her. They walked carefully across the twins' vegetable garden, picking their way through rows of cabbages, beets, broccoli, pumpkins. Looking on their left were the tall stalks of corn. Ahead of them was a small apple orchard bounded by a stone wall, and beyond this the woods through which they had walked this afternoon. Calvin led the way to the wall and sat there, his red hair shining silver in the moonlight, his body dappled with patterns from the tangle of branches. He reached up, pulled an apple off a gnarled limb, and handed it to Meg, then picked one for himself. Tell me about your father. He's a physicist. Sure, we all know that, and he's supposed to have left your mother and gone off with some dame. Meg jerked up from the stone on which she was perched, but Calvin grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her back down. Hold it, kid. I didn't say anything you hadn't heard already, did I? No, Meg said, but continued to pull away. Let me go. Come on, calm down. You know it isn't true. I know it isn't true. And how anybody, after one look at your mother, could believe any man would leave her for another woman just shows how far jealousy will make people go, right? I guess so, Meg said, but her happiness had fled, and she was back in a morass of anger and resentment. Look, dope, Calvin shook her gently. I just want to get things straight. Sort out the fact from fiction. Your father's a physicist. That's a fact, right? Yes. He's a PhD several times over. Yes. Most of the time he works alone, but some of the time he was at the Institute for Higher Learning in Princeton, correct? Yes. Then he did some work for the government, didn't he? Yes. You take it from there. That's all I know. That's all I know too, Meg said. Maybe Mother knows more. I don't know. What he did was, well, it was what they call classified. Top secret, you mean? That's right. And you don't even have any idea what it was about? Meg shook her head. No, not really. Just an idea because of where he was. Well, where? Out in New Mexico for a while. We were with him there. And then he was in Florida at Cape Canaveral, and we were with him there too. And then he was going to be traveling a lot, so he came here. You'd always had this house? Yes, but we used to live in it just in the summer. And you don't know where your father was sent? No. At first we got lots of letters. Mother and father always wrote each other every day. I think mother still writes him every night. Every once in a while, the postmistress makes some kind of crack about all her letters. I suppose they think she's pursuing him or something, Calvin said rather bitterly. They can't understand plain, ordinary love when they see it. Well, go on. What happened next? Nothing happened, Meg said. That's the trouble. Well, what about your father's letters? They just stopped coming. You haven't heard anything at all? No, Meg said, nothing. Her voice was heavy with misery. Silence fell between them, as tangible as the dark tree shadows that fell across their laps, and that now seemed to rest upon them as heavily as though they possessed a measurable weight of their own. At last, Calvin spoke in a dry, unemotional voice, not looking at Meg. Do you think he could be dead? Again, Meg leapt up, and again Calvin pulled her down. No! They'd have told us if he were dead. There's always a telegram or something. They always tell you. What do they tell you? Meg choked down a sob, managed to speak over it. Oh, Calvin, Mother's tried to find out. She's been down to Washington and everything. And all they'll say is that he's on a secret and dangerous mission, and she can be very proud of him. But he won't be able to communicate with us for a while. And they'll give us news as soon as they have it. Meg, don't get mad, but do you think maybe they don't know? A slow tear trickled down Meg's cheek. That's what I'm afraid of. Why don't you cry? Calvin asked gently. You're just as crazy about your father, aren't you? Go ahead and cry. It'll do you good. Meg's voice came out trembling over tears. I cry too much. I should be like Mother. I should be able to control myself. Your mother's a completely different person, and she's a lot older than you are. I wish I were a different person, Meg said shakily. I hate myself. Calvin reached over and took off her glasses. Then he pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped her tears. This gesture of tenderness undid her completely, and she put her head down on her knees and sobbed. Calvin sat quietly beside her, every once in a while patting her head. I'm sorry, she sobbed finally. I'm terribly sorry. Now you'll hate me. Oh, Meg, you are a moron, Calvin said. Don't you know you're the nicest thing that's happened to me in a long time? Meg raised her head and moonlight shone on her tear-stained face. Without the glasses, her eyes were unexpectedly beautiful. If Charles Wallace is a sport, I think I'm a biological mistake. Moonlight flashed against her braces as she spoke. Now she was waiting to be contradicted, but Calvin said, Do you know that this is the first time I've seen you without your glasses? I'm as blind as a bat without them. I'm nearsighted like Father. Well, you know what? You've got dreamboat eyes, Calvin said. Listen, you go right on wearing your glasses. I don't think I want anyone else to see what gorgeous eyes you have. Meg smiled with pleasure. She could feel herself blushing, and she wondered if the blush would be visible in the moonlight. Okay, hold it, you two, came a voice out of the shadows. Charles Wallace stepped into the moonlight. I wasn't spying on you, he said quickly, and I hate to break things up, but this is it, kids. This is it. His voice quivered with excitement. This is what? Calvin asked. We're going. Going? Where? Meg reached out and instinctively grabbed for Calvin's hand. I don't know exactly, Charles Wallace said, but I think it's to find Father. Suddenly, two eyes seemed to spring at them out of the darkness. It was the moonlight striking on Mrs. Who's glasses. She was standing next to Charles Wallace, and how she had managed to appear where a moment ago there had been nothing but flickering shadows in the moonlight, Meg had no idea. She heard a sound behind her and turned around. There was Mrs. Whatsit scrambling over the wall. My, but I wish there were no wind, Mrs. Whatsit said plaintively. It's so difficult with all these clothes. She wore her outfit of the night before, rubber boots and all, with the addition of one of Mrs. Buncombe's sheets, which she had draped over her. As she slid off the wall, the sheet caught in a low branch and came off. The felt hat slipped over both eyes, and another branch plucked at the pink stole. Oh dear, she sighed. I shall never learn to manage. Come te piccolo falla amaro moroso, Dante. What a grievous pain a little fault doth give thee. With a claw-like hand, she pushed the hat up on Mrs. Whatsit's forehead, untangling the stole from the tree, and with a daft gesture took the sheet and folded it. Oh, thank you, Miss Whatsit said. You're so clever. Un asnau vejo sabe más que un potro, a Perez. An old ass knows more than a young colt. Just because you're a paltry few billion years, Mrs. Whatsit was starting indignantly when a sharp, strange voice cut in. All right, girls, this is no time for bickering. It's Mrs. Witch, Charles Wallace said. There was a faint gust of wind. The leaves shivered in it. The patterns of moonlight shifted, and in a circle of silver something shimmered, quivered, and the voice said, I do not think I will materialize completely. I find it very tiring, and we have too much to do. The trees were lashed into a violent frenzy. Meg screamed and clutched at Calvin, and Mrs. Witch's authoritative voice called out, Quiet, child! Did a shadow fall across the moon, or did the moon simply go out, extinguished abruptly and completely as a candle? There was still the sound of the leaves, a terrifying rushing. All light was gone. Darkness was complete. Suddenly, the wind was all sound. Meg felt that Calvin was being torn from her. When she reached out for him, her fingers touched nothing. She screamed out, Charles! And whether it was to help him or for him to help her, she did not know. The word was flung back down her throat, and she choked on it. She was completely alone. She had lost the protection of Calvin's hand. Charles was nowhere, either to save or to turn to. She was alone in a fragment of nothingness. No light, no sound, no feeling. Where was her body? She tried to move in her panic, but there was nothing to move. Just as light and sound had vanished, she was gone too. The corporeal Meg was simply not. Then she felt her limbs again. Her legs and arms were tingling faintly, as though they had been asleep. She blinked her eyes rapidly, but though she herself was somehow back, nothing else was. It was not as simple as darkness or absence of light. Darkness has a tangible quality. It can be moved through and felt. In darkness, you can bark your shins. The world of things still exists around you. She was lost in a horrifying void. It was the same way with the silence. This was more than silence. A deaf person can feel vibrations. Here, there was nothing to feel. Suddenly, she was aware of her heart beating rapidly within the cage of her ribs. Had it stopped before? What had made it start again? The tingling in her arms and legs grew stronger, and suddenly she felt movement. This movement she felt must be the turning of the earth rotating on its axis, traveling its elliptic course about the sun, and this feeling of moving with the earth was somewhat like the feeling of being in the ocean. Out in the ocean, beyond the rise and fall of the breakers, lying on the moving water, pulsing gently with swells and feeling the gentle, inexorable tug of the moon. I am asleep. I am dreaming, she thought. I'm having a nightmare. I want to wake up. Let me wake up. Well, Charles Wallace's voice said, that was quite a trip. I do think you might have warned us. Light began to pulse and quiver. Meg blinked and shoved shakily at her glasses. And there was Charles Wallace standing indignantly in front of her, his hands on his hips. Meg, he shouted. Calvin, where are you? She saw Charles. She heard him, but she could not go to him. She could not shove through the strange, trembling light to meet him. Calvin's voice came as though it were pushing through a crowd. Well, just give me time, will you? I'm older than you are. Meg gasped. It wasn't Calvin that wasn't there, and then that he was. It wasn't that part of him came first, then the rest of him followed like a hand, and then an arm and an eye, and then a nose. It was sort of shimmering, a looking at Calvin through water, through smoke, through fire. And then there he was, solid and reassuring. Meg, Charles Wallace's voice came. Meg, Calvin, where's Meg? I'm right here, she tried to say, but her voice seemed to be caught at its source. Meg, Calvin cried, and he turned around, looking about wildly. Mrs. Witch, you haven't left Meg behind, have you? Charles Wallace shouted. If you've hurt Meg, any of you, Calvin started, but suddenly Meg felt a violent push and a shattering as though she had been thrust through a wall of glass. Oh, there you are, Charles Wallace said, and rushed over to her and hugged her. But where am I? Meg asked breathlessly, relieved to hear that her voice was now coming out of her in more or less a normal way. She looked around rather wildly. They were standing in a sunlit field, and the air about them was moving with the delicious fragrance that comes only on the rarest of spring days, when the sun's touch is gentle and the apple blossoms are just beginning to unfold. She pushed her glasses up on her nose to reassure herself that what she was seeing was real. They had left the silver glint of the biting autumn evening, and now around them everything was golden with light. The grasses of the field were a tender new green, and scattered about were tiny multicolored flowers. Meg turned slowly to face a mountain reaching so high into the sky that its peak was almost lost in a crown of puffy white clouds. From the trees at the base of the mountain came a sudden singing of birds. There was an air of such ineffable peace and joy all around her that her heart's wild thumping slowed. When shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? Came Mrs. Who's voice. Suddenly the three of them were there, Mrs. Whatsit with her pink stole askew, Mrs. Who with her spectacles gleaming, and Mrs. Witch still little more than a shimmer. Delicate multicolored butterflies were fluttering about them as though in greeting. Mrs. Whatsit and Mrs. Who began to giggle, and they giggled until it seemed that whatever their private joke was, they would fall down with the wild fun of it. The shimmer seemed to be laughing too. It became vaguely darker and more solid, and then there appeared a figure in a black robe and a black peaked hat, beady eyes, a beaked nose, and long gray hair. One bony claw clutched a broomstick. "Well, just to keep you girls happy," the strange voice said, and Mrs. Whatsit and Mrs. Who fell into each other's arms in gales of laughter. "If you ladies have had your fun, I think you should tell Calvin and Meg a little more about all this," Charles Wallace said coldly. "You scare Meg half out of her wits, whisking her off this way without any warning. Finexerunt animi raro et papucha loquentis," Mrs. Who intoned. "Horace, to little action, less to words inclined." "Mrs. Who, I wish you'd just stop quoting." Charles Wallace sounded very annoyed. Mrs. Whatsit adjusted her stole. "But she finds it so difficult to verbalize, Charles dear. If it helps her, it helps her if she can quote instead of working out words on her own." "And we mustn't lose our sense of humor," Mrs. Witch said. "The only way to cope with something deadly serious is to try to treat it a little lightly." "But that's going to be hard for Meg," Mrs. Whatsit said. "It's going to be hard for her to realize that we are serious." "What about me?" Calvin asked. "The life of your father isn't at stake," Mrs. Whatsit told him. "What about Charles Wallace then?" Mrs. Whatsit's unoiled door hinge voice was warm with affection and pride. Charles Wallace knows that it's far more than just the life of his father. Charles Wallace knows what's at stake. But remember," Mrs. Who said, "nothing is hopeless. We must hope for everything." "Where are we now, and how did we get here?" Calvin asked. "Uriel, the third planet of the star Malik in the spiral nebula Messier 101. "This I'm supposed to believe?" Calvin asked indignantly. "As you like," Mrs. Witch said coldly. For some reason, Meg felt that Mrs. Witch, despite her looks and ephemeral broomstick, was someone in whom one could put complete trust. It doesn't seem any more peculiar than anything else that has happened. "Well then, someone just tell me how we got here." Calvin's voice was still angry, and his freckles seemed to stand out on his face. "Even traveling at the speed of light, it would take us years and years to get here." "Oh, we don't travel at the speed of anything," Mrs. Whatsit explained earnestly. "We tesser, or you might say we wrinkle. Clear as mud," Calvin said. Tesser, Meg thought. Could that have anything to do with Mother's tesseract? She was about to ask when Mrs. Witch started to speak, and one did not interrupt when Mrs. Witch was speaking. "Mrs. Whatsit is young and naive. She keeps thinking she can explain things in words," Mrs. Who said. "Who plus sait plus satate, French. You know, the more a man knows, the less he talks." "But she has to use words for Meg and Calvin," Charles reminded Mrs. Who. "If you brought them along, they have a right to know what's going on." Meg went up to Mrs. Witch. In the intensity of her question, she had forgotten all about the tesseract. "Is my father here?" Mrs. Witch shook her head. "Not here, Meg." "Let Mrs. Whatsit explain. She is young, and the language of words is easier for her than it is for Mrs. Who and me." "We stopped here," Mrs. Whatsit explained, "more or less to catch our breaths and to give you a chance to know what you're up against." "But what about Father?" Meg asked. "Is he all right?" "For the moment, love, yes. He's one of the reasons we're here. But see, he's only one." Give me 1 second, guys. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, where is he? Please take me to him. We can't, not yet, Charles said. You have to be patient, Meg. But I'm not patient, Meg cried passionately. I've never been patient. Mrs. Who's glasses shone at her gently. If you want to help your father, then you must learn patience. Vitam impendre vero, to stake one's life for the truth. That is what we must do. That is what your father is doing, Mrs. Whatsit nodded, her voice like Mrs. Who's, very serious, very solemn. Then she smiled her radiant smile. Now, why don't you three children just wander around? And Charles can explain things a little. You're perfectly safe on Uriel. That's why we stopped here to rest. But aren't you coming with us? Meg asked fearfully. There was silence for a moment. Then Mrs. Witch raised her authoritative hand. Show them, she said to Mrs. Whatsit, and at something in her voice, Meg felt prickles of apprehension. Now, Mrs. Whatsit asked, her creaky voice rising to a squeak. Whatever it was Mrs. Witch wanted to see, it was something that made Mrs. Whatsit uncomfortable too. Now, Mrs. Witch said, they may as well know. Should I change? Mrs. Whatsit asked. Better. I hope it won't upset the children too much, Mrs. Whatsit murmured, as though to herself. Should I change too? Mrs. Who asked. Oh, but what fun I've had in these clothes. But I'll have to admit Mrs. Whatsit is the best at it. Das Werk lobt den Meister, German. The work proves the craftsman. Shall I transform now too? Mrs. Witch shook her head. Not yet, not here. You may wait. Now don't be frightened, loves, Mrs. Whatsit said. Her plump little body began to shiver, quiver, to shift. The wild colors of her clothes became muted, whitened. The pudding bag shape stretched, lengthened, merged. And suddenly before the children was a creature more beautiful than any Meg had ever imagined. And the beauty lay in far more than the outward description. Outwardly, Mrs. Whatsit was surely no longer a Mrs. Whatsit. She was a marble white body with powerful flanks, something like a horse, but at the same time completely unlike a horse. For from the magnificently modeled back sprang a nobly formed torso, arms, and head, resembling a man, but a man with a perfection of dignity and virtue, an exhalation of joy such as Meg had never before seen. No, she thought, it's not like a Greek centaur, not in the least. From the shoulders, slowly a pair of wings unfolded, wings made of rainbows, of light upon water, of poetry. Calvin fell to his knees. No, Mrs. Whatsit thought, though her voice was not Mrs. Whatsit voice. Not to me, Calvin, never to me. Stand up. Carry them, Mrs. Witch commanded. With a gesture both delicate and strong, Mrs. Whatsit knelt in front of the children, stretching her wings wide and holding them steady but quivering. On to my back now, the new voice said. The children took hesitant steps towards the beautiful creature. What do we call you now? Calvin asked. Oh, my dears, came the new voice, a rich voice with the warmth of a woodwind, the clarity of a trumpet, the mystery of an English horn. You can't go on changing my name each time I metamorphose. And I've had such pleasure being Mrs. Whatsit, I think you'd better keep to that. She, he, it smiled at them. The radiance of smile was as tangible as a soft breeze, as directly warming as the rays of the sun. Come, Charles Wallace clambered up. Meg and Calvin followed him, Meg sitting between the two boys. A tremor went through the great wings, and then Mrs. Whatsit lifted, and they were moving through the air. Meg soon found there was no need to cling to Charles Wallace or Calvin. The great creature's flight was serenely smooth. The boys were eagerly looking around the landscape. Look, Charles Wallace pointed. The mountains are so tall that you can't see where they end. Meg looked upward, and indeed the mountains seemed to be reaching into infinity. They left the fertile fields and flew across a great plateau of granite-like rock shaped into enormous monoliths. These had definite rhythmic form, but they were not statues. They were like nothing Meg had ever seen before, and she wondered if they had been made by wind and weather, by the formation of this earth, or if they were a creation of beings like the one on which she rode. They left on the great granite plain and flew over a garden even more beautiful than anything in a dream. In it were gathered many of the creatures, like the one Mrs. Whatsit had become, some lying among the flowers, some swimming in a broad crystal river that flowed through the garden, some flying in what Meg was sure must be a kind of dance, moving in and out above the trees. They were making music, music that came not only from their throats, but from the movement of the great wings as well. "What are they singing?" Meg asked excitedly. Mrs. Whatsit shook her beautiful head. "It won't go into your words. I can't possibly transfer it to your words. Are you getting any of it, Charles?" Charles Wallace sat very still on the broad back on his face, an intently listening look, the look he had when he delved into Meg or his mother. "A little, just a very little, but I think I could get more in time." "Yes, you could learn it, Charles, but there isn't time. We can only stay here long enough to rest up and make a few preparations." Meg hardly listened to her. "I want to know what they're saying. I want to know what it means." "Try, Charles," Mrs. Whatsit urged. "Try to translate. You can let yourself go now. You don't have to hold back." "But I can't," Charles Wallace cried in an anguished voice. "I don't know enough, not yet." "Then work with me and I'll see if I can't verbalize it a little for them." Charles Wallace got his look of probing, of listening. "I know that look," Meg thought suddenly. "Now I think I know what it means, because I've had it myself, sometimes doing a math with father when a problem is just about to come clear." Mrs. Whatsit seemed to be listening to Charles' thoughts. "Yes, well, that's an idea I can try. Too bad you don't really know it, so you can give it to me direct, Charles. It's much more work this way." "Don't be lazy," Charles said. Mrs. Whatsit did not take offense. She explained. "Oh, it's my favorite kind of work, Charles. That's why they chose me to go along. And even though I'm much younger, it's my one real talent. But it takes a tremendous amount of energy, and we're going to need every ounce of energy for what's ahead of us. But I'll try. For Calvin and Meg, I'll try." She was silent. The great wings almost stopped moving. Only a delicate stirring seemed to keep them aloft. "Listen then," Mrs. Whatsit said. The resonant voice rose and the words seemed to be all around them, so that Meg felt she could almost reach out and touch them. "Sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth, ye that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift their voice. Let the inhabitants of the rocks sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord." Throughout her entire body, Meg felt a pulse of joy as she had never known before. Calvin's hand reached out. He did not clasp her hand in his. He moved his fingers so that they were barely touching hers. But joy flowed through them, back and forth between them, around them, and about them, and inside them. When Mrs. Whatsit sighed, it seemed completely incomprehensible that through this bliss could come the faintest whisper of doubt. "We must go now, children." Mrs. Whatsit's voice was deep with sadness, and Meg could not understand. Raising her head, Mrs. Whatsit gave a call that seemed to be a command, and one of the creatures flying above the trees nearest them raised its head to listen, and then flew off and picked 3 flowers from a tree growing near the river, and brought them over. "Each of you take one," Mrs. Whatsit said. "I'll tell you how to use them later." As Meg took her flower, she realized it was not a single blossom, but hundreds of tiny flowerets forming a kind of hollow bell. "Where are we going?" Calvin asked. "Up." The wings moved steadily, swiftly. The garden was left behind, the stretch of granite, the mighty shapes, and then Mrs. Whatsit was flying upward, climbing steadily, up, up. Below them, the trees of the mountain dwindled, became sparse, were replaced by bushes, and then small dry grasses, and then vegetation ceased entirely, and there were only rocks, points, and peaks of rock, sharp and dangerous. Hold on tight, Mrs. Whatsit said. Don't slip. Meg felt Calvin's arm circle her waist in a secure hold. Still they moved upward. Now they were in the clouds. They could see nothing but drifting whiteness, and the moisture clung to them and condensed in icy droplets. As Meg shivered, Calvin's grip tightened. In front of her, Charles Wallace sat quietly. Once he turned just long enough to give her a swift glance of tenderness and concern. But Meg felt as each moment passed that he was growing farther and farther away, that he was becoming less and less adored baby brother and more one of whatever kind of being Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which actually were. Abruptly, they burst out of the clouds into a shaft of light. Below them were still rocks. Above them, the rocks continued to reach up into the sky. But now, though it seemed miles upward, Meg could see where the mountain at last came to an end. Mrs. Whatsit continued to climb. Her wings were straining a little. Meg felt her heart racing. Cold sweat began to gather on her face, and her lips felt as though they were turning blue. She began to gasp. All right, children, use your flowers now, Mrs. Whatsit said. The atmosphere will continue to get thinner from now on. Hold the flowers up to your face and through them, and they will give you enough oxygen. It won't be as much as you're used to, but it will be enough. Meg had almost forgotten the flowers and was grateful to realize she was still clasping them, that she hadn't let them fall from her fingers. She pressed her face into the blossoms and breathed deeply. Calvin still held her with one arm, but he too held the flowers to her face. And this is where we're going to stop for today, guys. Let me stop sharing here. Stop sharing. Hello, everyone. Okay, so, hi. So who all did we meet today? What all did we find out today? Let's see here. Dustin. What's up, Dustin?
We met Charles Wallace, Mrs. Who, Mrs. Whatsit,
and Mrs. Which.
Mrs. Which.
Yep. That's right. So what kind of like creature does it seem like Mrs. Whatsit turned into? She kind of turned into an odd kind of creature, didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I have a kind of assignment for you guys for next week, okay? Because we're going to read more next week. I want you guys to draw a picture of what you think Mrs. Which, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Whatsit look like based on what we've read so far, okay? So you guys have a whole week to do this. I want to see what you guys think Mrs. Which, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Whatsit look like. I think you guys can do it. Good? Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, Jonah.
Hey, Amanda, that's a great idea. I think you guys can do that for a two-parter. You can draw those this week. You can share them at Art Show and Tell, and then you can show Amanda on Monday what they came out like. Maybe at Art Show and Tell they can give us some recommendations for how to add some things to it. So
there you go.
Very cool idea. So that's all we have for our first session this morning. We still have a lot of fun stuff going on. So feel free to hang out and socialize for a little bit. We'll be back at the top of the hour. We'll be stopping over to Gallia with Brooke and all of those tips and conversations that she has with us. So we'll